Hey, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Old Scribes. It's March 26th. I'm wearing the green. Last few days of March with my partner in crime here, George Willis. George, how's it going?
Going well, all good in South Florida. Good weather. Can't complain about anything. Great time of year.
Great.
March Madness going on.
Yep.
So
I'm already at it. I'm already out. I picked St. John's.
I know that was tough. There was so much hype around St. John's and the year they'd had, and just everybody was on the bandwagon, and all of a sudden, boom, they got beat by Arkansas. So, well, that's the way it goes. And they got to rebuild and restart. But it was a good year for St. John's basketball and college basketball in New York. It's been a long, long time.
Yes. Yes. I,
Yeah.
I, I think the last time that St. John's was prominent, that was in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean they hadn't won the tournament since Mullen played for them, and back then '85, and they had a lot of high expectations during the Felipe Lopez years, uh, which was an interesting story. I had been covering the Giants for Newsday for 7 years, from '87 to '94, and I got a call from the New York Times, seeing if they wanted me to come over to their newspaper and cover St. John's, because they had just had a huge recruiting class with Felipe Lopez and Zindon Hamilton and some other guys. They were like going to be like the new Fab Four or Fab Five or whatever. Didn't quite pan out that way, but they caused a lot of attention. But St. John's got me over to the New York Times, so I've always kind of had a special place for that team, and it was good to see them have a great year finally.
Yeah. Yeah. They were kind of the sexy pick this year. If you weren't
Hmm.
going to pick like the Dukes or, but yeah, that was a little. I'm out, so now I'm living vicariously through my kids' brackets
Hmm.
in the
How, how
same.
how are they doing?
They're still in it. I think my daughter is my high schooler. I think she's like in second place out of like 20 people, so 20
Uh,
brackets.
okay,
Yeah, you know, it's
that's good.
it's, it's certainly she's certainly interested in the games. But,
Hmm.
$150 to a high school kid
Yeah,
is it's a lot of money.
yeah. It's interesting what we've seen. I wrote an article for the New York Sun that a lot of the madness has gone out of March because uh, you've got so many number one seeds still alive. We got three of the number two seeds still alive. It's
Yeah.
no seed higher than number 10 for the first time in a long, long time. And there's no real Cinderella story, and about how that might be a product of NIL and the portal, and the talent always going up and up and up, and the rich getting richer, and so you're seeing a lot of the traditional powerhouses all there. You had 14 SEC teams in the tournament. So, and then the portal opened Monday, and you've got everybody from all the mid-major schools like New Mexico State and UTEP, and all those kids are putting their name in there to see where they can go next. So it's just kind of crazy in college basketball nowadays.
Well, like someone said the other day that like the mid majors now are like the JUCOs now, right?
Mhm,
They're just they know those players aren't going to be there for long if they have good
mhm,
years. The coaches aren't going to be there for long. University of New Mexico is a perfect example with Patino going to Xavier. Um, there's a program that hadn't been to the tourney in 13 years.
mhm.
Um, and who knows when they'll be back now
Yeah.
because they're starting from scratch starting next year. New
Mhm.
coach, new players, whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's the dynamics of college basketball and college football and college athletics
Mhm.
all the way around have definitely changed in the last
Mhm.
5 years.
Yeah. In regards to Patino leaving UNM, a lot of my sources in Albuquerque predicted that, because they've got a bit of a scandal going on with hazing allegations within the team.
Mm.
And so I think that was how much of a role that played in Patino leaving. I don't know. It's something that really hasn't been mentioned a lot. during the course of this postseason, but it still very much exists, and it's something that the university is going to have to face. So, a lot of people in Albuquerque are not surprised that he left, especially to a school that really doesn't, it might be a little bit of a lateral move. You're not talking about a Big East powerhouse, and he's going to coach against his father. And but maybe it was a good bit of timing on his part to get out of there before trouble starts.
Yeah, that's a good point because I think my first reaction was like, really, Xavier? You know what I mean? Like it is a bit of a lateral move. You would expect him to go a little higher, and if they had won one more game, he probably would have gone somewhere, a bigger school.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it does. That does. Where there's smoke, there's fire, George.
Yeah, there's something going on, and then good
Yeah,
on him if he's able to get another job and get out of there before it gets ugly and the allegations starts
yeah,
flying. But we'll have to see what happens to their program. I know one of their best players entered the portal, and he's probably good enough to probably get elevated to one of the power conferences. But I guess that's just the way it is. It's going to be with schools like that. I don't know what's going on with the UTEP guys. I didn't see anything early on, but maybe that's probably changed. But these coaches, man, they got to deal with a lot. You groom a player, you coach them all year, and the day the portal opens, here's the first one in, the Jackson from New Mexico State. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I mean the grass is always greener, right? I mean,
mhm,
especially for especially for kids in their 20s.
mhm,
It's always going to be better somewhere else. It's good here, but it's going to be
mhm.
better somewhere else. The sad part is that in 20 years, they're going to look back and say, or 10 years, they're going to look back and say, I should have stayed, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There's a kid that played for New Mexico State, Bostic, averaged 15 points a game at Cal Northridge last year, came to New Mexico State, hardly scored.
Yeah.
His average was down to single digits. So, some of these kids have to really evaluate what they're looking for. And is it really going to get them to the next level? Are you wanting to get to another school where you're going to sit the bench and not score as much and not play as much because you think it's a bigger opportunity? You come back to the same school, you're experienced, you know the system, you know the culture. Uh, I think there's got to be a time when this starts to, I don't know if it evens out a bit, but everybody doesn't rush to the portal to think it's a bag of riches in there because I don't know really if it is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just the way that things are now, and
Mhm.
and it's. I think kids a lot of times don't understand, like you're saying, chemistry. There's something to be said for chemistry and having the right chemistry with not only your coach but also with your teammates, and
Mhm.
it takes some time to get to that place where you're winning. You can't just, and we've seen this a million times in the sports that we've covered, you can't just plop
Mhm.
one piece into the middle of everything, expect everything to work.
Mhm.
And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of these kids and coaches are finding that out the hard way.
I know, and this is like precious years
Yeah,
in their lives. This is when they're 18 to 22 and 23. You develop your relationships. You go from being, a high school kid into a young man or young lady. And if you're constantly moving around every year or every other year, what kind of relationships are you building? How are you growing when you're constantly worried about where you're going to live and trying to acclimate into a new system and make new friends and try to get along with the coach and new players and things like that. And boom, 4 years you're gone and your eligibility is done and you can't do that again.
yeah,
So I think these are things that these kids got to think about when they just throw their name in the portal. And because you come out of there, you've gone to 3 colleges in 4 years and fifth year, and you really don't have a major and anything like that. It's just, and it's not
yeah,
like they're all getting rich either. I mean, there's some sort of perception out there that all these kids are making big money when they're really not.
yeah, yeah.
And
Minimal.
yeah, and so I just I just, concerned about 5 years down the line, and when they look back, these years go by fast, and you don't get
Yeah.
them back. You don't
And
get them.
and just the idea too of going somewhere and, sticking it out,
Mhm,
riding out the rough patches, getting better, um, you know, getting self-improvement. We've all had to go through it when we were growing up.
mhm,
And when you just go from place to place, you're really not forced to grow in any kind of way. It's just,
mhm.
uh, it's kind of the path of least resistance, really.
Yeah. And then, and what situation are they trying to look for? I mean, the coach can tell them everything they want to hear and get them there. And most coaches, they want one or two guys to sort of fit into whatever role
Yep.
they're looking for them to fill. So it's not like, uh, there's a whole lot of opportunities and a lot of holes out there.
Yep.
And I don't see anybody from New Mexico State jumping to Kentucky or anything like that.
Right.
So where are you going? What you trying to do? Why don't you stay another year and try to improve and see what you can do from that? You want to be a graduate transfer and go somewhere after you graduate, you can do that.
Hmm.
But I look at some of the numbers of the guys when they score a certain amount of points at one school and they transfer and see how well they did the next year. It's not always, that
Yeah.
that's wise of a move.
No. And in fact, I would guess that most of the time, it's probably not to their benefit,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
they're probably in the long run unhappy about it.
Right.
Um, One more question for you. I mean, in all your, in the stories that you've been doing with this and your new position at New Mexico State, do you see anything changing over the next 5 years as a result of any of this? I mean, do you think it's going to
Well, I
just
think
stay this way?
I think as it stands now, I think the power schools are just going to dominate and get their way, and they're going to sort of figure out a way to separate themselves from everybody else because I think the media money is going to be uh, so rich that that's what the four power schools or four power conferences are going to align themselves and figure something out. And then it'll be everybody else. It'll probably still be some sort of national tournament. But I think NIL and each program trying to raise their own money, I think that's here to stay. That's not gonna go away. So the schools with a lot of money and a lot of boosters and a lot of alumni and things of that nature, they've got the money to compete against themselves. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean, New Mexico State can't win or UTEP can't win Conference USA and get in the tournament. So I think schools like New Mexico State and Texas El Paso need to keep their eyes on schools within their conference. UTEP's going to the Mountain West, so that's who they're competing against. So, they want players to come to their schools to be the best in that conference and hope that maybe they're good enough to go to the next level.
Yeah.
So, I think that's where New Mexico State and UTEP want to be. They want to be at the top of their conference so they can get the best of the two-star players and the three, maybe a couple of three-star players every now and then. But they're never going to get the four-star players or even the
Right.
three-star players. So, that's where they have to focus, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And a quick word on UTEP. I do believe them going to the Mountain West is going to certainly be in, to their benefit just because of the travel. That's a lot of
Mhm,
people. That's what you know. When they went to Conference USA, which is spread all over the country. When they went, and I was covering UTEP football at the time under Mike Price, and um, it just the matchups didn't make any sense. They were so
mhm,
far. Nobody can get into them. Nobody can identify with them. I just think for the past 20 years that Conference USA affiliation has just been a dead zone.
mhm,
And I think getting back to some familiarity is really going to help that school out. I think in everything and winning more and recruiting. You know, just the travel. I think is one of those things that people don't look at, especially for a college kid. I
mhm.
think it's a big deal.
Right. Yeah. And then, you look at even with Mexico State, they have their conference tournament in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm
Yeah.
sure it's a beautiful city and there's a lot of things to do there and blah, 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 blah. but people aren't making their plans to go there to watch the conference tournament the way they did when it was in Vegas.
Yep.
It was an event, everybody would go and everybody would have a great time. It helped the team. It helped that the team did well. But when you don't have those kinds of incentives, especially in something as big as a conference tournament, I think it hurts the program a little bit. So yeah, I think Conference USA has been good as far as television exposure. But even that's the drawback. You're playing football games on Tuesdays
Yeah.
and Wednesdays and things like that. So
And if you're not winning, right?
right.
And if you're not winning,
Hmm.
the stadium is empty,
Hmm.
and it makes you look worse.
Right.
I think that TV exposure is even it turns into a bad thing because
Hmm.
people look at it and they just aren't.
Hmm. No
There's
question.
nothing about it. So, um, all right. So moving on, kind of a sad week in boxing this week. One of boxing's biggest stars, excuse me, George Foreman passed away on Friday, age of 76. Um, I know when I think I was just kind of scrolling on my phone on X and popped up, and I was, I had to do a double take. This is a big one.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I know. You think of George Foreman. I remember I was a huge Ali guy, so when they fought and Ali won, I was just thrilled. So, but you think about everything George Foreman has accomplished in his life. It's just simply extraordinary. You won a gold medal in boxing. How many people do that? Then he won the heavyweight championship and destroyed Joe Frazier uh, to win it. And he was this mean. Everybody feared him. He was real intimidating. And the way he boxed, it was like Paul Bunyan, like chopping down trees.
Hmm.
And and then he kind of went away and quit boxing and found God and and established his youth center. And I'll tell you a story. I was working in Memphis, Tennessee at the Commercial Appeal, and I was covering boxing there. They would have fights the first Tuesday of every month on Beale Street. And so boxing was like the first assignment they gave me, and it was in the back of the paper, 4 or 5 graphs, and they just handed sort of that beat to me, and I built it up to where it was a huge thing, right? And so I was handling a lot of the boxing stuff, and there was a trainer or fighter, or I think he was probably a manager or trainer from Houston, and we were talking about a fighter who was going to fight in Memphis, and he said, "By the way, George Foreman is thinking about making a comeback because he needs some money for his youth center in Houston." And I said, okay. So I actually interviewed him and did like 3 or 4 graphs on his comeback to boxing.
Before
And
he had fought anything,
before he had fought anything, before it was anybody knew anything, it was kind of a thing where I just fell into it and I wrote about it. And of course, it went nowhere because that was way before Twitter or anything like that. You'd write something commercial appeal, it didn't really go that far. But I'll always remember that. Like, guy said, and it's turned into this to where he's totally remade his image from this bully to Mr. Pitchman and Pitchman smiling all the time and just this warm, open person. And I was talking to the former HBO president, Ross Greenberg, today, and he talked about that. And because he was a minister and because he was that person 24/7 all the time after that, people could relate to him and they believed him. And he became this warm and fuzzy guy who was bigger than life and just you throw in the grill and all the millions there and how he cared for people and became a broadcaster for HBO. It's just amazing, really. It's just
yeah.
an amazing story.
Well, it's amazing in that, I mean, I was young when he was in his heyday, right? When he was
Mhm.
young. And but I still have, like, one of my first boxing memories was was him and Ali. And I don't know if I had seen a clip or seen a replay or whatever, but that's one of the earliest boxing memories I've ever had. And then by the time I was in, you know, third grade, everybody knew who George Foreman was, even though he was by that point he had already been beaten by Ali. He had, been in that brawl with Ron Lyle and been beaten by Jimmy Young in his last fight before the comeback. And so, you know, I just remember there was a boxing magazine that ran a picture of him, and he had shaved his head, his hair, and he had shaved his mustache, and even the caption said, "You may not." He was standing with, I think, Larry Holmes, and it said like,
Mhm.
"You may not recognize the guy on the left, but that's George Foreman." And I stared at that photo,
Mhm.
going, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see
Mhm.
it. So then, fast forward 10 years, and he makes his comeback. I was a senior in high school, and I was a know-it-all 18-year-old thinking, "Oh, what is this guy doing?" Like everybody, right?
Mhm.
Uh, this is going nowhere. You know, he's fat. Well, you look at the pictures now, he wasn't that fat, right? Like, he wasn't the Adonis that he was when he was 24 years old, but he definitely
Mhm.
wasn't fat.
Mhm.
And it's funny how that, nowadays on Twitter, people kind of repeat what they hear, and it
Yeah.
kind of takes a life of its own. Well, it happened back then too, because everybody was
Mhm.
saying he was fat. He wasn't that fat.
Mhm.
And the comeback start. It was from one club fighter to another club fighter. Before you know it, he's like 10-0 on his
Mhm.
comeback, and then he's like 13-0, and then he's like 16-0, and you're like, okay, well, this is still a circus.
Mhm.
And then he fought Jerry Cooney, right, who was also on a comeback, and he was so impressive in knocking out Cooney that you almost had to say, "Wow, okay, well, the guy can still punch," right?
Mhm.
And then, but even then, when he fought Holyfield, I was just like, it was, Holyfield was my guy. He was my era, right?
Mhm.
There's no way this old man is going to compete with the real deal. And
Mhm.
my God, he did. And
Right.
it was the tremendous, tremendous fight over 12 rounds, and that was kind of like my era of George, where he proved himself. Um, and you realized it made you take stock and like, wow, this guy is really a badass. Like, this guy
Mhm.
is truly one of the greatest fighters that ever lived. And then for him to go back and win the heavyweight title, even after that, was, like you said, it's his life story is just it probably, it's not Ali, but it's close. It's close.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's different. It's
Yeah.
different because even when he stood up there at the '68 Olympics and he waved the little tiny flag and was proud to be an American, that came in the same Olympics where John Carlos
Yep.
and Tommy Smith were raising their fists and protesting the treatment of, blacks in America. So he was on like a little different side, even in the Olympics. And he says he had the scowl his first tenure as heavyweight champion because that's how he saw Sonny Liston portray himself, as a guy who always wore a scowl and treated people kind of, like dirt and stuff like that. And so that's kind of the attitude he wanted to portray. He thought he should portray as a champion, which is why he was the way he was during his first reign, which is kind of funny and the way he embraced the whole losing in Zaire as well. I think was a little different than a lot of athletes would take that today. He was humble about it. He gave Ali all his props. Never really made excuses, although he could have had a zillion, and went on and made a name for himself and created his own legacy to where even the Rumble in the Jungle is like a positive for him. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
probably one of
It's
the toughest losses of all time.
it's almost like he became a man of God, and it's almost like he recognized, because he did make excuses
Hmm.
after the first time he fought. I mean, immediately after
Yeah,
he fought
early on.
Ali.
Yeah.
He was complaining about a fast count by the referee. He was complaining about the loose ropes.
Ropes, right.
He was it was everything under the sun that he was
Mhm.
complaining about. But it's almost like once, he found religion, it's like he was able to release himself of all that burden.
Mhm.
Um and he was finally able to admit to himself, like, yeah, I was beat by the better man.
Mhm.
The better man beat me. And that's why I think one of the greatest lines of all time is that when they're sitting, that he tells a story of they were in a clinch and he had beat Ali and beat him, and Ali wouldn't go down. And George was exhausted, and he said, "Is that all you got, George?"
George, yeah.
And George said, "Yep, that's about it." I just think that is such a great kind of example
Mhm.
for all athletes to look at their losses and look at their defeats, and humans to look at their defeats. Like you said, there was no bigger loss in any sport that either of us have covered
Mhm.
than George losing to Ali in Zaire, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
it was an upset. It was humiliating. It was embarrassing, because he was supposed to be the baddest man on the planet at the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for him to come all the way back, and it's almost like in order for him to come back, he had to release that. He had to admit to himself that that he was beaten by the better man. And once he did that, the sky was the limit. And look what happened after that. He
Mhm.
had a even better second career than a first career.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd say that, of all the sports, we've been around a long time, so we've seen athletes when they were in their prime and in their youth and full of testosterone and everything else, and wanted to beat the hell out of each other. That the rivalries that they're having at that particular time are what's going to sustain them when they become older and live off of those legacies. So
Mhm.
that somewhere down the road, the fiercest of rivals are going to be wind up being friends. Tyson Holyfield and things of that nature because they're tied together. And athletes in boxing, athletes are tied together in a very intimate, personal way because it's one on one.
Yeah.
Football, you got 11 on 11, and basketball, you got the team and this and that. But boxing, it's one on one, and it's to me, it's great to see like the clips of Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard and even Tommy Hearns. They're moving a little slower nowadays and
Yeah.
things like that. But to enjoy their legacies that they've set for themselves and be adored by people and to be together and have fun and reminisce. I think that's a little bit special, a thing about boxing that you might have more so than maybe in other sports.
Yeah. I mean, if two guys like Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales
Mhm.
can 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 end up being friends
Right,
after, I mean, Barrera punched him at a press conference. You know what I mean? It was
right.
they
Mhm.
truly hated each other, and
Mhm.
for them to end up being friendly with each other. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's certainly unlike any other sport
Mhm.
in that way.
Right.
Um, did you? How many Foreman fights did you cover?
You know what? I don't think I covered any Foreman fights. He was rolling in the early 90s,
Hmm.
and then I was covering football
Yeah.
for Newsday. So I didn't really cover any of his fights. I didn't really start covering boxing for the Post until 2002.
Hmm.
So he was about finished by then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about it. I mean, he did beat. It's now been more than 20 years that he beat more.
Mhm, mhm.
So it seems like yesterday, right? In a
Right,
lot of
right,
ways.
right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, it was a while back.
Mhm,
And just on that in that fight in particular, I mean, it's unbelievable that he won it because he took such a beating leading up to that
mhm,
one punch. It was
mhm.
um and he was wearing the same trunks as he was wearing when he lost to Ali, and they were a little faded.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, what a like Jim Lampley said, it happened, and
Right.
yeah. Um, well, and then also, I mean, same next day, Livingstone Bramble died. He's the former lightweight champion. I wrote a column on him after his death, and uh, he was a guy who I described as he was kind of ordinary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then he beat Ray Boom Boom Mancini, looked like the best pound for pound fighter in boxing, did it again,
Mm-hmm.
and then beat a guy named Tyrone Crawley from Philly, who was a boxer, the opposite of a brawler like Mancini. And Bramble at the time was definitely a pound for pound guy and one of the best fighters in boxing. And then just like that, boom, it was over. He got knocked out by Edwin Rosario, and that was it. It was
Mm.
over. And he went back to being ordinary. He never won another major fight in his career,
Wow.
which is amazing.
Well, because when he fought Boom Boom, I mean that was kind of an upset because Boom Boom was coming up and he had all the hype and the networks were behind him and there's
Yep.
this great story and you're a courageous fighter and Livingstone put the pin in that thing
Oh,
real
he
quick.
sure did. And I mean, he looked so good. I remember a friend called me and said, "Who is this guy? This is the best fighter I've ever seen." And I
Yeah.
mean, he was, obviously it was a styles thing. Mancini,
Mhm.
he knew how to fight him. But wow, he did look ridiculously good.
Yes,
And
he did.
to think that only lasted for 3 fights,
Mhm.
yeah, and then I think he lost, he became a trial horse, from
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
Um, but he you know, right before he got knocked out by Rosario, they were talking about him versus Camacho, which would have been a huge fight for like
Mhm.
1986. And yeah, he got knocked out before it could happen. Like a lot of fights in boxing,
Yeah.
just don't materialize.
Yeah, well. But he was really awesome. He had a little bit of a quirky style, that was a
Yeah,
little different. The Boom Boom really couldn't handle, like you said, it was a styles make fights kind of thing, and he probably could have fought him 10 times and never beat him,
right,
even as
right.
good as Boom Boom was,
Yeah,
right
yeah.
there. He was a good fighter, yeah.
I know there's a story. Speaking of Boom Boom, I know that he went to Cruces to train with the Burks, right? Didn't he? Like in the early '80s, and they were.
Okay, yeah, I'll tell you, yeah, I know a little bit about this story here. I probably don't know all the details, but he was going to be part of the Too Tall Jones debut.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Remember when Too Tall made his professional debut at the Pan American Center?
Yep.
Well, Ray Mancini was going to be on that card, and he was close to the Burke family, Louis Burke and Rocky and Sammy and things of that nature. And so everybody was really excited, excited for him to fight. And then I think if I remember correctly, he got food poisoning. He
Oh,
got a hold of some bad green chili, and I think that I think that
that was
that
all she wrote.
took him out. So yeah, or else he went to Juarez one night or something. I have to talk to him about that.
Yeah,
Find out the
yeah,
true story about why he pulled out of that fight because
yeah. He was. It's a good point. Like he's a little too close to the border, and at the time,
right, yeah.
Ciudad Juarez was a pretty happening place.
Mhm. So all of a sudden he was on the card, and then all of a sudden he was off the card. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's funny.
it's crazy. But yeah, he was supposed to fight. There was a lot of excitement there.
Yeah, and finally, they're on. We're recording this on March 26th. On March 30th, on Sunday, there's going to be a fundraiser for former two-time champion Bobby Ches and up in New Jersey. Ches is he was recently stricken with cancer. He had to have I think it started in his nose, so he had to have like reconstructive surgery to get rid of the cancer and all that because it had spread. So these three nonprofits on the East Coast came together to help him out. And it's the first time they've ever worked together. But Chez is somebody that's kind of he's kind of a folk hero up in New Jersey. Coming up on ESPN, this matinee idol looking kid, and then he went through some rough times, but ended up winning 2 world titles. The second one completely unexpected. I think he overcame like 4-1 odds to beat a guy that was, 12 years younger than he was, and he boxed like Muhammad Ali. He said so. I talked to Bobby, wrote a story on him, and he is definitely one of the more interesting characters to come across boxing over the last 40 years.
Yeah, he's probably one of those guys that epitomizes, a lot of fighters in this sport. He's, adored in New Jersey. He's a legend in New Jersey boxing circles, revered by just about everybody. And, but he's gone through his own personal struggles, and people are aware of that, and people understand that. So he's one kind of guy who gives you everything in the ring, what you want. He gives you 110% effort, and he was always there. And his broadcasting career was phenomenal when he was working for Showtime. He did the Bite Fight, which was a memorable thing. And I interviewed him actually for the book I did on that, and he was very, very helpful as to what he saw and what he was doing and what he was thinking. Crazy night. And so I'm glad to hear that he's doing better. That was a phenomenal story you wrote about on him and his situation. So congratulations to you, and for getting his story out there. But yeah, a good guy, loved by a lot of people I know in New Jersey, and you just wish him the best.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's a good point about his broadcasting career. I mean, he really was. It's too bad because his personal problems got the better of him. But I mean, he really was one of the better color commentators that we've had. In boxing that since I've been covering the sport. He was very, very sound and articulate and knowledgeable. So it's too bad that ended sooner than it should have. But yeah, like you said, he's a folk hero. He's a hero in New Jersey and a lot of other places because he was on TV so much back in the day.
Yeah, and good on the nonprofits for getting together and working together to help him out. And I'm sure this won't be the last time they do something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Matt Pomara, and he Long Island Boxing Charities. I spoke with him for a long time, and he him and Ring 8, which is in New York, and Friends of the Champ, which was actually started to help out former champion Iran Barkley, who was who was at that time living on the streets. And recently suffered a mild stroke, but I think he's recovered too. But yeah, good on those 3 organizations coming together and helping a guy and helping a lot of fighters, young and old.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no question.
All right, George. Well, good one.
Yeah, man, just us. I think we held it down, didn't we?
I think so. So. You know a little bit. You know a little bit about sports.
Yeah, we know a little bit. We just, nothing else we do.
Good. Alexa, be quiet.
She's explaining to us what
She's explaining to me she's explaining to us what sports is.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, George. Well, we'll be back next week with another exciting guest, and enjoy the tournament, and we'll talk soon.